What is the solution to young men's problems in an ever more feminized world? How do we deal with the issues affecting young men in a society so conquered by feminism that they cannot even conceive of what a man is anymore? Well, in the eyes of Zoe Strimple, the solution is to draft young white men into the military and then send them off to die in war. A thoroughly sympathetic individual, this Zoe Strimple, and no doubt about it, and I'm also glad to see that the British press in the Telegraph demonstrates its usual level of elevated empathy for white men in its country. Typically British, I suppose, at least modern British, as I can hardly imagine any other Western nation being able to print something quite so repugnant as this article and allow it to go to press. Anyways, we are going to be reading this now. Young white men do have problems, but they need to man up. Are you sure about that? The feminists are telling men to simply man up and fix the problems in the male way. I mean, that is always an option, but I thought we were trying to move beyond that. Although, if we keep pushing for much longer, well, options may indeed start to grow somewhat limited. It will not be a very feminist solution, but at the very least it will be less of a costly one than engineering a war to kill off the problem. Anyways, yes, masculinity is in a crisis, but the truth is that masculinity has always been in a crisis. Now that's a rich statement that will not be substantiated over much throughout the article. Last week, I was on a panel at the Oxford Literary Festival, sponsored by The Telegraph, if you please, and the topic was the Southport riots. In considering the subject, the excellent Tony Sewell, aka the Lord Sewell, of Sanderstead, aired the view that one big cause of social unrest in Britain is that white working-class boys are left behind. They are the bottom of the barrel, whether in school, higher education, prospects, health, happiness, or projected income. Isn't that remarkable? Feminism has led us to the era of equality, as it always promised. And by equality, we mean absolute inferiority in schools, in higher education, in health, in happiness, and income. Equality, the feminist way. More and more, I feel like the argument for an absolute patriarchy is strengthened. Sewell, the chair of the 2021 Commission on Race and Ethnicity Disparity report, knows the stats well. His report found that systemic racism, which is always and has always been a lie, is not what lies behind disparities in outcome in Britain. It's class, and poor white youth, mostly boys, do by far the worst. It's not class either. Now, bear you in mind, class is simply a British way to say differences that do not have to do with race or ethnicity. It is a bit of a, well, frankly, a bit of a cop-out in all due honesty. As by class, we simply mean white men as a grouping, and then as, rich, middle group, and poor. I forget the word. You get my drift here. Whereas in reality, of course, this is less class-based and more politics-based. Young men haven't suddenly started losing in every single field in society just by itself. This wasn't the first time the topic of struggling working-class white boys hit the headlines. There has long been a panic about the effect that feminism, and more recently Me Too and the discourse of toxic masculinity, have had on their psyches, leaving them with no choice but to turn to that barbarian Andrew Tate in droves. Now that is actually a good observation. The reason why people turn to Andrew Tate isn't that he is the best and the brightest, it is that there is simply no allowed alternative. The topic has once more caught fire since Netflix Adolescence, the finest piece of left-wing propaganda ever produced, came out. The miniseries about an English teenage white working-class boy accused of the murder of a female classmate. So revered as the legends as a tool of pure political propaganda, that it has been quoted by Keir Starmer on multiple occasions, also calling it a documentary. It has provoked anti-woke fury amongst those who believe that a white boy is the fall guy in a story of violence by another ethnic group. It is always safe, they point out, to blame a white cisgendered heterosexual male. And can anyone at any point disagree? And it has provoked that whiny mixture of folks' indignation and performative sentimentalism among those who feel as their sons turn to Tate or no boys who do, they must hold their nose and take seriously the idea that perhaps this squashed, left-out, derided demographic, once the backbone of the empire, has been given a raw deal since the decades since wokeness began its institutional creep. Despite its zeitgeist, I have refused to watch Adolescence. Maybe along the last few, and at least in the chattering class who have not tuned in, and honestly, you should. That's the thing. Adolescence tells a very different story than what it is purported to tell. There are several reasons for my refusal. One is that the miniseries, is obviously far too depressing. I suppose that, wanting entertainment instead, and I can sympathize. The second is that while I recognize this group is suffering, I simply don't feel inclined to indulge in either the huge pity party or the jamboree of toxic masculinity awareness raising that Adolescence has inspired. Frankly, Adolescence raises practically no points about toxic masculinity, it raises far more about toxic femininity. Yes, masculinity is in a crisis, but the truth is that masculinity has always been in a crisis. Ask any social historian. And as with all moments of media-friendly crisis of masculinity, we find ourselves talking about men like they're helpless little flowers. It is odd. Well, firstly, no. Masculinity has only been a crisis in very, very modern day time in generalized terms. And helpless little flowers, it is because there is no male outreach. There is no male opportunities to act out against the problems that we see. That is one of the key takeaways from Adolescence. The beautiful scene with the female psychiatrist who simply relentlessly keeps applying soft power to the boy who freaks out, rages out, as he has no answers to her repeated questions, to which there are no modern day male answers, only feminine ones. He has no response to what is it to be a male because he has never been given any frame of reference, any context, any conceptualization of what it is to be a man beyond beers and boobs. Working class white boys are found to be treated badly, and therefore do badly and act badly. One of the big issues cited is that they don't know their worth or purpose anymore, in society constantly calling them toxic. And that's the thing too, white men don't do badly. That's the problem, not in a term of acting out. They do poorly in terms of academia because there is an active campaign against them. Indeed, we can see a recent beautiful example of that, or recent actually, a historical one from 2019. Men have no friends and women bear the burden. So this lengthy article from Bazaar basically argues that since women have actively isolated men from masculinity, from male society, and from male friends, and behaving like men do, instead of forcing upon them feminine gender expectations, that now women have to be their husbands' friends. They have denied them all masculine friendship, boxing them in to an area of femininity where you have to talk about their feelings, for example. The beautiful part of the entire title here. Toxic masculinity and the persistent idea that feelings are a female thing has left a generation of straight men stranded on emotionally stunted islands. See, talking about your emotions is not really a male thing. When guys get together with an issue, they don't describe their feelings, their emotions. They vent, they are frustrated, they might even become aggressive with one another. They might curse and shout at the source of their frustration. They do not eloquently describe it, they have a very different way of expressing this hurt. When you once more bind them into the box of femininity, however, they can't vent to anyone else that is a male. They have to do it to women. This is literally the effect of women binding men and then going, well, I wasn't expecting to need to take care of him afterwards. I just want my man to be a woman. It's not how it works. And again, this is not a recent thing. This has been the goal and intent of feminism since its very inception. Very sad, but it's possible to get over such slights and thrive anyway. Women faced derision for almost all of history for simply being women. They were seen as neurotic, nervous, intellectually inferior, limited to back-breaking domestic labor and breeding. Well, that is absolutely terrible. I am sure that if you asked very nicely, the husband would perhaps let his wife take his place in the coal mines, or working any of the other ridiculously high mortality rate jobs that saw food be placed on the table of the average family in the olden days. I'm sure women would have been happy to march off to war instead of the men, or conduct again the countless ridiculously dangerous and hard jobs that were the bread and butter of male society. I'm sorry that you had to look after the children, but that's kind of simply just how it worked out, because it was the most effective solution. And I hate the back-breaking domestic labor. Listen, I am not making light of the work that is put into keeping a household running smoothly, the amount of clothes washing that people have to do. Again, I kind of have to do this shit myself as well. This is a lot of work, absolutely, but it frankly cannot be compared to working a full day's labor, especially not within the more physically strenuous forms of manual labor. It simply can't. And, I mean, today, many women are complaining about that very fact, that they do need to carry out full-term jobs on top of other duties that are then shared with men, as this also has been a point of feminism for ages as well. It's overblown. Anyone who would try to go beyond this was systematically ridiculed and often simply barred. Sure. Absolutely, because it was ridiculous, patently so, at the time. No, you can't go work in the mines. It's idiotic. You're not going to be able to perform the same labor. Of course, there was no educational encouragement or even guaranteed access unlike that enjoyed by every single child in Britain today. And it was completely acceptable for husbands to beat or rape wives seen as intransigent or just irritatingly alive. No, it was not. In fact, in the Western world, it was largely thoroughly illegal, or at the very least societally outrageous. And still women, by and large, obeyed the law and tried to get on. Well, now we don't have that. We have the opposite of this. We have the precise opposite of this, where in fact, female assault on male partners is barely if ever noticed. It is barely if ever registered or reported. Women in the UK can get people arrested or accosted by the police for making them feel uncomfortable. Women have become a privileged class in society to a degree that, frankly, feudal men would not have over their women. And then go, some sniping of a toxic masculinity is hardly a life sentence. To the privileged, their privilege is indeed invisible. And if boys are small men, and men are meant to be tough, which is why so many are frustrated now, we are told in this feminized society, can't they hold strong, even in the face of adversity? So, let me get this straight. The solution to systematic discrimination is simply to just accept it. Okay. I don't think that will hold up very long, frankly. I don't think that will work out very long at all. In fact, your entire argument is that women pushed back against that and now is allowed to misuse the other gender, to abuse it, because they had to suck it up. Equality, indeed. The idea that if we don't give them all a big cultural and social hug, they'll commit violence, become arsonists and misogynists isn't good enough. Why can't we expect them to be decent, hardworking people, even in tough circumstances? It might be good for them, even though we'd immediately be told we are crushing them with unrealistic expectations. What unrealistic expectations. This is the norm these days. Even entertainment. People are bringing up the Fantastic Four movies, for example, where the peak of masculinity in the Fantastic Four, Johnny Storm, the 007 daredevil character, the womanizer who loved women and women loved him, well, we can't have that anymore. He was previously branded as a womanizing, devil-may-care guy, but is that sexy today? I don't think so. This version of Johnny is less callous with other people's feelings, and ultimately there's a self-awareness about what's driving the attention-seeking behavior. As now we are defining Johnny Storm as chasing skirts simply because he's insecure, because he has to be emotional. He has to become a woman. This simply isn't how it works. And again, the very same article writer as well talks about, for example, stuff like this. Miriam Cates, a former Tory MP and a senior fellow at the Centre for Social Justice, sees the very small upward shift of young women relative to their male peers as a cause for getting the violence out for the young bucks. Apparently, young men failing to step up to the job of working hard at the school and the workplace is our fault, and women's, not men's. Yes. When you create a systematically unfair system, as you have in the Western world, through things like gender quotas, for example, through advantageous access to loans and capital, you do indeed get a world where one gender will look at reality and go, hold on, I'm being treated unfairly. Why am I being treated unfairly? And your only answer is, well, suck it up. I know we're abusing you. I know we're not treating you fairly. I know we are taking advantage, but listen, people 100 years ago were mean to other women. It's not an argument. And then we come to the worst part of all. Yes, young white men need help and encouragement and resource and schemes and mentorship, and not to be told they are worthless. That's very rich coming from the article writer here. But they're not entirely victims either. They do have a bit of agency. They do have their own will. Once more. We do, but we are being told very vociferously so that we shouldn't have. I don't wish to draft anybody's sons, but it does occur to one that in days gone by, the majority of these rootless boys, without obvious or easy prospect, held back by socio-economic class in far more rigid and brutal times, would have donned a uniform and gone off to war. Many would have died, which is a tragedy that is every parent's worst nightmare. For many, although, it was the making of them. They were scolded into men. They tasted valor, heroism, and for the more thuggish, the satisfaction of the appetite for brute force and combat sanctioned by the state. Let Britain be saved from a war like those that our 20th century forefathers and mothers experienced. May conscription never again be necessary, but let us find some way to get our ne'er-do-wells, stragglers, and miserable young men into something bigger than themselves, to stop them gravitating to all that is lower, nastier, and meaner. So, the solution is men simply have to shut up, tough up, and be treated miserably. And if they still can't do that, well, maybe we should just draft them and get a nice war going for them. See, if the suggestion had been to join the military, I would even be, at least in part, behind that, because the military is one of the only sources of masculinity remaining in the modern day. It is one of vanishingly few institutions in which young men may be able to experience rigor, discipline, the stricture of a well-organized military lifestyle, and to be around other men in an atmosphere, in an area, in a social setting that allows them to be men, to act in a competitive nature that is societally unacceptable these days. And even then, of course, that isn't really the case. We have seen British recruitment ads basically saying, oh no, we'll call a halt to the military exercise so that Mahmoud can have his prayer break. Of course we're gonna do that. We're just playing at war. Intersectionality and diversity is far more important than military matters, obviously. We've seen American recruitment adverts elevating women and the gay community over the soldiers. Only when war becomes a prospect do we suddenly turn to the young white men and go, hey, I'm gonna need you to die for your country. Why? Why on God's good earth should anyone do that? Why is this a solution that should be accepted by any young man? Why is someone who is not in any danger and has never been in any danger virtually throughout the entirety of human history to take up the responsibility for the protection of the body politics have the balls, the guts to demand anyone to do that for her, to solve what she views as societal problems caused by men not being strong enough? Why? Genuinely, what should any young man have as a reason for taking up arms in the defense of modern-day Britain? What? Wives, if they even have ones, who will be left behind amongst an ever-increasing immigrant population who there now have been suggestions will not be drafted? Oh yes, that's a perfect idea. Hey, son, go off to war. Don't worry, Ahmed will take care of the young women in your absence. This is evil. This is an actually straight-up vile, evil thing. If this had been presented as the plot of a movie, we are going to send young men off to war whilst replacing them with immigrants, it would sound too ridiculous. It would sound absurd. Yet that is the solution we are now facing. What else would there be to defend Britain today? Western values? If young men today wish to defend Western values, their first target isn't Moscow, it's going to be Berlin, it's going to be London, it's going to be Paris. Why on God's good earth would we go out to fight foreign enemies when the domestic ones are equally, if not more so, vicious and demonstrably evil? Why should any man even accept the draft? Patriotism? Doing your duty for a nation that is systematically abandoning them, that refers to them as the bottom of the barrel and sees them come up last in every single area of social life. It is an absurdity. It is a vile, evil, degenerate absurdity. And that is the only feminist solution. That is the only solution that Sony Strimmel, Zoe, comes up with in this entire article. It's shut up, we know we're abusing you, just deal with it, and maybe we should send you off to die. I am frankly overwhelmed at the sheer amount of feminine empathy. Truly, it's remarkable. This is why the Scythians used to hand over, or the Thracians actually, excuse me, used to hand over captured prisoners of war to their women because they knew that there exists no more sadistic a creature than a female. So, no, Zoe, men aren't going to need to just man up and suck up being treated worse. That is not a solution. And the draft, even if what happens, I hope you've got a lot of prison space, because frankly, young men today, they'd be better off in jail than serving on the front line for a nation that hates them. Well, they might find more camaraderie in prison than they would in the front line these days. And furthermore as well, do you really think that solutions like these are going to lead to a better society? What is the end game here, Zoe? Once you've pushed young white men to the absolute margins of society, once you have denied to them every ounce of empathy or kindness, God help me. What can you do but laugh? On the state of Europe today, the state of Britain, and the state of media, I am very, very glad that ranks like these barely receive a readership anymore. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.